Welcome to the art class.
Imagine, imagine standing in front of the most famous night scene in all of art history.
Right.
A painting that's so iconic, so deeply embedded in our culture that it literally has the word night right there in the title.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're in this museum looking at this massive masterpiece, and you know, you lean in to study the masterful depiction of midnight shadows. But then you notice something strange.
A little inconsistent, maybe.
Exactly. There are these warm, glowing light sources. Shadows are falling in these distinct, really harsh patterns that, well, they only happen under direct sunlight. And you realize with this sudden shock that the sun is shining directly onto the canvas.
It's honestly one of the most brilliant, completely unintentional optical illusions in the history of art.
Hmm.
You are looking at a masterpiece that is entirely defined by the limits of what we can actually see, or I guess what centuries of history have permitted us to see.
Welcome to this custom deep dive. If you're the kind of person, and we definitely know you are, who loves uncovering those hidden aha moments behind the things you thought you already knew, you are going to absolutely love today's exploration.
Oh, for sure.
We are pulling from this fascinating, incredibly detailed art history script titled The Night Watch Was Never at Night. And our mission today is to unpack how the absolute crown jewel of the Dutch Golden Age, a painting that's been analyzed, visited, and reproduced, millions of times over, has actually had the wrong name for more than 150 years.
Yeah, we're going to explore how this wild combination of chemical degradation, literal bureaucratic vandalism, and, hidden compositional symbols have completely obscured the truth of Rembrandt's greatest masterpiece.
A little wild.
It really is. And in doing so, we're going to see how human perception is often shaped by literally everything except the facts right in front of us.
I am still just marveling at this level of collective cultural blindness. The Night Watch, painted by Rembrandt in 1642, has its own purpose-built gallery at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Millions of people flock to see it.
Right, it's a pilgrimage site.
Exactly. And it is unambiguously a daytime scene. There's a guy front and center wearing this blazing, radiant yellow coat that practically reflects sunlight. So, how did the entire art world look at obvious daytime shadows and just collectively agree, yep, looks like midnight to me?
Well, to understand how daylight became night, we really need to start with what Rembrandt was hired to paint in the first place, and how radically he decided to just break all the rules of his era.
Because this wasn't just some sudden artistic whim.
No, not at all. It was a highly specific commercial commission.
Okay, so let's set the scene in 1642. You've got these 18 men from an Amsterdam civic militia company, District 2 specifically.
Right.
And they pool their money together, and they hire Rembrandt, who is, 36 years old at the time, sitting right at the absolute height of his fame.
Yeah, he was the guy to go to. And the economics of this arrangement actually tell us everything about the expectations. Each of these 18 men paid roughly 100 guilders to be immortalized.
Which was a lot of money.
A fortune. And to put that in perspective, these militia groups, the Schutterigen, they weren't actively defending the city walls anymore by 1642. They were mostly ceremonial.
Like a country club.
Exactly. Think of them as wealthy merchants and prominent citizens who essentially wanted to play dress-up. They wanted a very expensive, very public monument to their own status as the unquestioned pillars of the community.
Right. So they were buying a 17th century status symbol. It was just this incredibly expensive flex. And usually, when a group of guys paid for a militia portrait back then, they expected a very polite, static lineup.
Yeah, like a formal corporate team photo.
Or a school yearbook picture. Everyone stands neatly in a row, every face is clearly illuminated, and everyone just radiates quiet, respectable dignity. That's what you got for 100 guilders.
But Rembrandt, being Rembrandt, takes that standard, boring contract and completely throws out the rule book. He doesn't give them a static lineup at all. He gives them a massive life-size theater production.
The canvas is staggering in scale.
Right.
363 by 437 centimeters.
It's huge. And he paints chaos, action, and motion. You can practically hear the drum beats in the background. There is a dog barking in the corner.
Wow.
And stepping out into the light, you have Captain Franz Bennett Koch dressed in stark, pitch black, giving a forward order to his lieutenant, Willem van Reitenberg, who is just glowing in this elaborate yellow outfit.
Right, so it's this explosive narrative moment. These men are stepping out of the shadows and into the blazing sun, which of course brings us back to our central mystery, where did the sun go? If Rembrandt painted a daytime parade, how did it get this, dark mode filter slapped across it.
Well, it wasn't an instant filter. It was a slow, suffocating blanket of chemistry and time. See, it was standard practice in the 17th century to apply a clear varnish over oil paintings to protect the paint.
Makes sense.
But over decades, that varnish doesn't stay clear. It begins to oxidize and yellow, and then you have to consider the environment it was in.
Right, the heating and lighting.
Exactly. For centuries, this painting hung in halls heated by peat fires, illuminated by oil lamps, and filled with tobacco smoke. That sticky varnish trapped all the soot, the dirt, and the grime.
So it's not that someone literally painted over the sun, it's that the canvas physically trapped the passage of time on its surface, right? Just slowly burying the daylight under microscopic layers of 17th and 18th century smog.
Precisely. The painting just got darker and darker, inching toward midnight. And because human memory is incredibly short, people eventually just forgot what it originally looked like.
That is so crazy.
I know. The first documented use of the name the Night Watch wasn't even until the 1790s. That is a full century and a half after it was painted.
I mean, to be fair, the real name of the painting is a total bureaucratic mouthful.
Yeah.
It's the militia company, District 2nd, under the command of Captain Franz Bannock Koch. I can completely understand why the general public needed a punchier rebrand.
It is definitely unwieldy. But the real turning point in this story, the moment the illusion was finally shattered, didn't happen until the mid-20th century.
During World War II, right?
Yes. The Dutch government knew the painting was a national treasure, so they took it off the wall, rolled it up into a cylinder, and literally hid it away in a subterranean bunker to protect it from the Nazis.
Which just, that is an incredible image in itself, this massive, priceless masterpiece just rolled up in a cave.
Right. And when the war ended and it was finally brought back to Amsterdam in the 1940s, conservators decided it was time for a major intervention. They carefully stripped away that centuries-old layer of yellowed, soot-stained varnish.
And boom, there is the sun. The daytime scene is definitively revealed. The yellow coat is glowing again. But here is the part that fascinates me the most, because it says so much about human stubbornness.
Oh, excellent.
Even after the 1940s, cleaning proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that it was a sunny afternoon. Society just chose the myth. They kept calling it the Night Watch. They had the physical reality right in front of their eyes and essentially said, no thanks, we prefer the old story.
It perfectly illustrates how cultural inertia works. Once a concept is embedded in the collective consciousness, in the museum catalogs, the guidebooks, the history textbooks, it becomes incredibly difficult to dislodge.
Yeah, it's stuck.
The sources we're working from point out that trying to rename the Night Watch today would be like trying to rename the Eiffel Tower. The myth simply became more powerful than the actual paint on the canvas.
Okay, so the naming issue was a slow accident of chemistry, combined with our, refusal to update our vocabulary. But while the varnish merely obscured the painting, what happened to it in 1715 was a physical, permanent mutilation.
Yes, it was.
If the dirt was an accident, this next part was deliberate, bureaucratic vandalism.
This is where the story shifts from a quirky misunderstanding into a genuine art historical tragedy. So in 1715, authorities decided to move the painting from its original home to the Amsterdam Town Hall. But the problem was the specific wall they chose.
It's a completely ridiculous problem. The giant canvas literally didn't fit between two doors on the wall.
Right. Most people would just find a different wall, or maybe build a custom frame that slightly overlaps the doorway. But the decision makers at the town hall chose the most destructive, unimaginable path. They took scissors and knives to Rembrandt's masterpiece.
Oh my gosh, they literally cut the canvas on all four sides, just sliced it down to size.
Yep.
And the most heartbreaking part of this is the left side of the painting. They completely sheared off a vertical strip that was about 60 centimeters wide. By doing that, they amputated two of the militia members from the composition entirely.
Gone forever.
Think about that. These were guys who had paid their hard-earned 100 guilders. They paid for eternal fame. And they were literally left on the cutting room floor just to make the painting fit into a tight spot. It's exactly like brutally cropping two friends out of a group wedding photo just so it fits into a cheap discount frame you bought, except it's a priceless 17th century masterpiece.
That is a painfully accurate analogy. It was an act of mutilation born out of pure spatial convenience and, frankly, bureaucratic indifference. And the only reason we even know what those missing 60 centimeters look like is due to an incredible stroke of historical luck.
Thank goodness for Jarrett London's.
Exactly. A minor 17th century painter named Jarrett London's had made a much smaller copy of Rembrandt's original composition shortly after it was painted, long before the scissors came out.
His little copy is the only proof we have of the original crop. And this takes us right into the modern day, where we are using absolute cutting-edge technology to try and fix a 300-year-old mistake. In 2021, the Rijksmuseum launched an initiative using AI and machine learning that just completely blew my mind.
It is a remarkable intersection of historical preservation and modern neural networks. The museum wanted to recreate the missing borders, but they couldn't just, blow up London's copy and stick it on the side.
Right, because their styles were so different.
Exactly. London's was a fine painter, but his style was entirely different from Rembrandt's. So they fed London's composition into an AI algorithm to teach it what was missing. Then they fed the AI high-resolution scans of Rembrandt's actual surviving canvas to teach it how Rembrandt painted.
Wow.
We're talking his specific brushstrokes, his impasto technique, his color palette, even the microscopic cracking of his aged paint.
So the AI essentially acts as a digital translator. It looks at the London's copy to say, okay, there's a militiaman standing over here, but then it uses Rembrandt's visual vocabulary to actually paint him.
Precisely. The algorithm mathematically extrapolated the missing sections, generating an image of those lost men in the exact style of the master. The museum then printed these AI reconstructions and displayed them seamlessly alongside the original canvas. For the first time in 3 centuries, the painting was complete again.
A literal digital resurrection.
Yeah.
But that AI project is just one piece of a massive ongoing campaign called Operation Night Watch, which began in 2019. If you walk into the Rijksmuseum today, the painting isn't just hanging quietly on a wall. It is sitting inside a custom-built, transparent glass chamber.
It is restoration framed as radical transparency. The conservators are working in real time inside that glass box, and it is all being live-streamed to the world. And they are bringing technologies to bear on this canvas that honestly seem like science fiction. They're using X-ray fluorescence and multispectral imaging.
Okay, let's break those down because they do sound incredibly sci-fi. How do those tools actually work on a 400-year-old piece of fabric?
Well, instead of just taking a surface photograph, these scanning technologies bombard the painting with different wavelengths of light and high-energy X-rays. When those X-rays hit the canvas, the different elemental metals mixed into the 17th century paints like copper, iron, or lead, they absorb the energy and fire back their own unique fluorescent signature.
So it's like a barcode scanner for chemicals.
It acts exactly like a chemical fingerprint reader. It allows conservators to look completely through the top layers of the painting, analyzing the invisible foundation beneath the surface.
And because they can look through the paint, they're finding things no one ever knew existed. Like this recent discovery of a completely unknown lead-white ground layer underneath the entire composition.
Yeah, and to understand why that matters, we have to look at how paintings are built. A ground layer is the foundational primer. You don't just apply oil paint to raw canvas. The fabric would just absorb it and rot. You have to prime it first. Yeah. Art historians always assumed Rembrandt used a standard clay or chalk ground, which was typical. But the X-ray fluorescence revealed a thick layer containing lead white.
So why does finding lead white change the story so much?
Because lead white is heavy, it's highly toxic, it's incredibly expensive, and it is extremely durable. It tells us that Rembrandt wasn't just slapping primer on a canvas. He was engineering an architectural foundation to support a painting the size of a theater stage. It completely upended our understanding of his physical process.
Which perfectly sets up this quote from the Rijksmuseum director, Taco Dibbets. When talking about these scans, he said, "We know so little about how Rembrandt worked on this." I find that breathtaking.
It really is.
You have millions of visitors, centuries of obsessive scholarship, the most advanced chemical scanning technology on planet Earth, and the definitive expert sitting in Amsterdam says, we still don't really know.
It forces a profound humility. It underscores that Rembrandt's genius was deeply, deeply idiosyncratic. But Dibbets' quote that we know so little, it doesn't just apply to the chemical makeup of the primer. It applies just as strongly to the actual visible content of the scene.
Right, because Rembrandt left mysteries embedded directly in the paint that art historians are still aggressively fighting over today.
Absolutely. Let's direct our attention to the margins of the composition. Picture the canvas in your mind. If you look behind the captain, slightly to the right, hidden deep in the background shadows, there is a face. And it's a face that breaks the entire logical structure of the crowd. It is clearly not one of the paying militia members.
It's Rembrandt himself. He snuck a sly little self-portrait right into the dark background.
Yeah, most scholars agree that it is him. It wasn't entirely uncommon for painters to include themselves in crowd scenes, kind of a subtle way of signing the work and saying, I was here to witness this.
It's an early photobomb.
Exactly. But the choice to place himself half obscured by shadow, quietly observing the theater he created, is a very specific psychological choice. It points to an artist who delighted in subverting expectations and planting unexpected details in the frame, which of course naturally brings us to the single most debated figure in the entire masterpiece, the Golden Girl.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So if you were visualizing the painting, you have this massive group of tall, heavily armed, very serious men wearing dark, heavy clothing. And then floating right in the middle ground, there is a small, luminous figure.
She really stands out.
A young girl in a brightly glowing yellow dress. Rembrandt uses the lighting to draw your eye past the muskets and directly to her.
Yeah.
And for some completely inexplicable reason, she has a dead chicken hanging upside down from her belt.
To modern eyes, it is entirely bizarre. Logically, a glowing young girl with a dead bird does not belong in the middle of a civic militia parade. So, how do we explain her?
Well, the mainstream traditional art historical view is that she is highly allegorical. The claws of the dead chicken, the clow in Dutch, were actually a traditional heraldic emblem for this specific branch of the militia company.
Oh, I see. So she's a visual pun. The claws represent the company. In this view, she isn't a literal person who wandered into the street. She's a living mascot, representing the company's identity and civic virtue. I mean, I can buy that. It makes historical sense.
It does.
But then there's the conspiracy theory. And this is where the interpretation of the painting gets wild. In 2009, a British filmmaker named Peter Greenaway released a documentary called Rembrandt's J'accuse, and his theory is radical. He claims the painting isn't a celebration of the militia company at all. He says it is a literal accusation of murder. It is a provocatively dark reading of the canvas. Greenaway argues that Rembrandt embedded a visual indictment against his own wealthy patrons, exposing a conspiracy among the Amsterdam elite. And his primary piece of evidence relies on the specific angles of the weapons.
A musket, right.
Right. If you look at the background on the left side, there is a soldier loading a musket. Greenaway traces the geometric line of that musket barrel and points out that it is aimed squarely at the back of Captain Bennet Cock.
So he's suggesting this isn't a parade, it's a true crime scene playing out in slow motion. And the musket is the literal smoking gun. If that's his theory, what on earth is the Golden Girl doing there?
In Greenaway's interpretation, the girl with the chicken isn't a civic mascot. She is a witness, or perhaps even a victim, to this underlying corruption and violence. The light isn't illuminating her virtue, it's shining a spotlight on a crime.
Okay, I have to push back hard on Greenaway here. Isn't this just a classic case of a modern filmmaker projecting our 21st century true crime obsession onto a 17th century painting? Mainstream art historians firmly reject this, right?
Oh, completely.
They argue the musket is just a compositional choice to create a sense of chaotic action and depth, not a literal murder plot. But even as I say that, there is this lingering doubt. Is it possible that a psychological master like Rembrandt, a guy who hid his own face in the shadows, really was dropping dangerous Easter eggs right in front of the people paying him?
And that tension is exactly what makes the debate so valuable. Greenaway, being a filmmaker, naturally reads the canvas like a cinematic storyboard. He looks for narrative suspense and hidden agendas. Traditional art historians read the canvas through the strict lens of 17th century civic conventions.
Which is much more dry.
Right. Almost no serious scholar accepts the murder conspiracy as factual history. But the true value of Greenaway's theory isn't whether it holds up in a court of law. Its value is that it forces us to look closer. It shakes us out of our complacency and reminds us that Rembrandt was an artist uniquely capable of hiding profound, subversive meaning in plain sight.
So what does this all mean for us today? We aren't 17th century art scholars. What is the takeaway for the person standing in the museum looking at this giant, complicated canvas?
If we synthesize everything we've explored from the sources today, The Night Watch is ultimately a masterpiece about the profound limits of human perception. Every single layer of its history is a story of something being hidden and our willingness to just accept the illusion.
Wow.
The chemical varnish hid the glorious sunlight. The town hall scissors hid the soldiers on the margins. The intricate shadows hide the artist's own face. And the title itself hid the absolute truth of the scene for generations.
It is such a beautiful, almost comedic irony.
Yeah.
You have this 400-year-old painting sitting in a high-tech glass box right now, actively being reverse engineered by artificial intelligence and multispectral lasers, and the primary lesson it's teaching us is that our absolute most confident assumptions might just be centuries of accumulated misreading.
Exactly. It serves as the ultimate reminder that history is not a static object frozen in time. History is constantly shifting based on who is doing the looking, what they have been primed to expect, and the physical condition of the evidence left behind.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, building on everything we've uncovered today. Think back to those two militia members on the far left side of the original canvas, the ones who got amputated by the town hall planners.
The guys who paid their 100 guilders.
Exactly. They paid their hard-earned money. They stood patiently in the studio. They posed for the absolute greatest master of their generation. They fully believed they had successfully purchased immortality. But simply because their presence was geographically inconvenient to some random bureaucrat with a pair of scissors, a century later they were snipped out of history.
Oof.
Erased.
It's tragic.
So the next time you look at a historical record or a famous photograph or even just a trending news story on your feed today, ask yourself, what am I looking at right now that has been subtly cropped to fit the frame of whoever was in charge and whose faces have been left on the cutting room floor?
That is exactly the kind of critical thinking and the questioning of the frame that this painting demands of us.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It is always an incredible joy to unpack these hidden histories with you and to realize that the dark mode filters of the world can always be cleaned off if we just take the time to look a little closer and ask a few more questions. We cannot wait to invite you back for the next exploration.